Hello friends, welcome to Coffee with Gaz. This week, or in this episode, this video, what I'm going to be discussing is the topic of intensity boosting techniques. So, when I talk about intensity boosting techniques, what I'm really discussing are methods through which you can increase the density of your training. So when we say density of training, what I mean is the amount of work that you're able to get done in a given period of time. So that's the best way to classify these types of training systems. So examples of this would include supersets, drop sets, rest pause methods. So a superset being where you perform one exercise right after the other with no rest. So for example, an antagonistic superset where you perform a bench press, training all the pushing muscles, and a row, training all the pulling muscles, one after the other, because there's not that much interference between those two exercises versus doing two pressing or two pulling exercises. You're able to increase the amount of work you do within a given period of time, hence increasing training density. Similarly, a rest pause type of method would be where one performs 12 reps with a given load. It doesn't have to be 12 reps, it's just an example. So 12 reps with 100 kilos, you're approaching failure, you put the weight down, you take 3 to 5 breaths, deep breaths, trying to recover just a little bit, and then you extend the set by doing maybe another 3 to 5 reps, so you're kind of working closer to failure again. So you're allowing for partial recovery, but far from full recovery. So just enough to be able to get some more reps, and hence, again, increase the amount of work that you're doing within a given period of time. Drop sets, very similar again. But this time what we're doing is, rather than maintaining the intensity, which we're doing when we're doing a rest pause set in terms of maintaining the same load, this time we're actually reducing the load that we're using. So you might reduce it by 20 to 30% and then you crank out more reps. So again, you're increasing the amount of work that you do within a given period of time. Very clearly, those things are qualitatively and quantitatively different. So when we look at a superset, you're talking about increasing the amount of work you do in a given period of time, but not with the same muscle groups. With a rest pause set, you're using the same muscle groups, the same exercise, but you're also maintaining the intensity for a given, as in like the actual load that you're using. But then when we look at drop sets, it's like, yeah, it's the same muscle again, but it's distinct from rest pause, because basically what you're doing is you're actually reducing the intensity in that context. So all of those things have their own kind of unique attributes, but the main question that we're posing in this video is, why would you actually go ahead and use these techniques in the first place? Okay, so from my perspective, the main time that I'm interested in including these methods within programming is where we're stuck for time. That's the number one consideration. So where one only has 30 to 45 minutes to train, let's say, but you know that you need a higher volume of work than you're able to do in that time with standard straight sets and fixed rest periods, that's when we're going to start including some of these techniques. So if I was to suggest to one of my clients to use supersets, the key thing that I'm thinking about there most of the time is that I want them to be antagonistic. So I want someone to be able to get the most strength and hypertrophy stimulus out of a given exercise and then do another exercise where that's not going to be very much interfered. So I'm not going to do squats and deadlifts, okay? There's interference there, similar muscle groups, and they're both very fatiguing. But I might do something like a bench press and rows. That's a nice way of including those. So antagonistic type supersets are a great option there when you are stuck for time. The application is of course important. You're not just going to superset any exercises. So when we are starting to include these types of techniques, these density or intensity boosting techniques, I'm generally going to do it on exercises that do not require a high level or do not induce a high level of systemic fatigue. So generally, one is going to feel less fatigued systemically after a bench press than you would after a set of 3 to 5 on deadlifts, let's say. So if you're doing deadlifts, you know that your whole body is fatigued, and it's very difficult to say that you could go and do any exercise at a very high level of performance right after that. So for exercises like squats, deadlifts, heavy clean and pressing, for example, anything that's requiring a large proportion of your output, then I would keep those exercises on their own at the beginning of the workout. The same could be said if you're doing very heavy bench pressing where you need to be really on point. I do those things at the beginning of the workout and then add in those supersets or density boosting techniques later in the workout. So for example, that might look like your A exercise in your plan is a squat, so you're doing your heavy squats first. You leave those on your own, but then B1 and B2, so your second and third exercise, they're actually put into a superset, and that's a bench press and a barbell row superset. Okay, so what you've done is you've placed the hardest, most taxing work at the beginning on its own, allowing for full recovery between sets, but then you're putting your kind of secondary work that's maybe still challenging but a little bit less fatiguing, you're putting that together in the form of a superset. You know, you might then say, oh yeah, I'm also doing a bit of arm work in my workout. So for example, you're doing bicep curls at the end and you normally do 4 sets of 12. You might say to yourself, you know what, I want to include some rest pause to shorten that. So you could say, I'm going to do 2 rest pause sets, 2 sets of 20 with my 12 rep max. So what you do is you do 12 reps, take a couple of breaths, do 3 or 4 more, take a few breaths, do 3 or 4 more. And then you hit your target of 20 and you do that for 2 sets. And what you'll find is that the end result in terms of kind of fatigue and the feeling, the subjective feeling of that stimulus is going to be very similar to if you had done 4 sets. Now they're not the exact same, but in terms of time efficiency, they can be super, super helpful. Okay, so that's kind of the main context in which we apply these techniques when someone is restricted for time. This isn't the video we're going to go into detail on the differences between each respective technique, how to set it up in every exercise, but rather just giving you an overview. Okay. Another thing that's very relevant at the time of recording is we're currently in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what that means is that we don't actually have access to gyms, or at least most of us don't. So a lot of us are doing body weight training, maybe training at home with old weights that are maybe not as challenging as they normally would be. So a lot of our workouts mightn't be quite as challenging. So this is a great time to include those kind of density boosting techniques or intensity boosting techniques. So for example, if you're someone who's quite strong, you normally train with 140 kilos for set of 10 on bench press, and push-ups just aren't really cutting it for you, then one example of where you could try to apply this would be doing rest pause sets with push-ups. So for example, you might do a set of 30 and you're like, yeah, I kind of felt that, it was okay, it's still a little bit further from failure. Take 10 to 20 seconds break, crank out more. Take 20 seconds break, crank out more. So what you're doing is you're allowing for partial recovery so that your muscle or muscles and the contributing systems are still in a state of fatigue, so that you're getting a greater amount of fatigue for a given kind of unit of work, you could say. So you're going to be more fatigued, the stimulus is going to be greater, even though you haven't done the most amount of reps that you could. So you could say, oh, I'll do 6 sets of 30 with 3 to 5 minutes rest. But what you'll find is that the stimulus will actually be a lot greater with a smaller amount of reps when you actually shorten that rest and increase that intensity or that density, you could say. So again, it's not to say that longer rest periods are not superior. A lot of the time, especially for strength, it is just better to do straight sets or with longer rest. But that's just not always practical, especially when you're doing home workouts where you're limited in terms of equipment. And if you're going to do sets of 30 with 5 minutes rest, like that's going to be a long workout, and when motivation is already kind of running low, that can be quite difficult. So that is another suggestion. So as I said, guys, there's many ways that you could apply these types of techniques within your training program. The main ones I'd be looking at are time efficiency and restricted gym equipment, or restricted access to equipment, or restricted load available. So they're the types of things that I would be thinking about at this time, guys. If you have any questions, of course, pop them down below, and we will have other videos expounding upon like the specifics of different techniques. So if you have any particular questions about, for example, rest pause sets, how do we apply them, we do have an article on site on that topic, briefly running through it. But we also are happy to record more videos kind of giving you those details. So have a good day, evening, morning, wherever you are, guys, and we'll catch up with you soon. Be happy, and remember that it is too easy.